Hi, I'm Dawn Damari, and you're listening to another episode of A Teaspoon of Healing. Today I have a guest with me, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. Welcome, Dr. Sarah, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being a guest today, and I hope your day is going well.
Yeah, so far so good.
So, Dr. Sarah, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background, your education, and your work with our listeners?
I would love to. So I have a PhD in medical biophysics. To be honest, what attracted me to the program was the fact that it was all of the science words mashed together so that I could say I have a PhD in medical biophysics for the rest of my life. But what that means is that I have a background in multidisciplinary medical research. So I studied problems that happen in critical care medicine, how to regulate the immune system in those situations, and how to take advantage of systems that the body already has to try to amp those up. So these protective mechanisms we already have, try to leverage those to be even more protective in the critical care units. I came into, for lack of a better term, the wellness community through my own health journey. So at the time that I was doing medical research, I was morbidly obese. I had a dozen different diagnosed health conditions. It felt like I was collecting them the way some people collect stamps. And then when my first daughter was born, I just found myself too physically unwell to balance like early motherhood and the demands of an academic career in research. And I ended up taking what I had initially intended would be, a few years off to just be a mother. I'd always intended on going back to academia. But during that period of time, I sort of accidentally found myself as a science communicator and health educator online. And so this became, I think, something that not just uses my like medical research background. It's also a place where I can sort of talk about my personal experience, which I think really helps. Uh, it helps in how I communicate. I don't think it helps in terms of like the person learning, but it helps me to frame what I'm teaching in the compassion that just comes from like, yeah, I know what chronic pain is. I know what extreme fatigue is. I understand these experiences. Um, and my science background is sort of what informs the resources that I create. So I would say that now I call myself a science communicator on like nutrition and health topics. So I talk about what nutrients do in the body and what foods contain them and how to combine different foods so we get the full range of nutrients our bodies need, and talk about Nutrivore as a dietary philosophy. So Nutrivore is the goal of getting all of the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat. I talk about all of that from the perspective of like summarizing the scientific literature. And all of that then is like wrapped up in the language of personal experience of being somebody who found profound healing through diet and lifestyle modification.
Wonderful. What a great background. And thank you for sharing that. It's going to help a lot of people. And I really liked how you shared your story because a lot of people resonate with that and have gone through the same things, especially
Yeah.
after having kids, especially after having kids.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about nutrient deficiency, nutrient density. It seems like
Mhm.
a lot of your research, a lot of your studies have been about that, and a lot of your work has been about that. So nutrient deficiency, it's something we don't think a lot about, to be honest.
Yeah.
I do, I'm a dietitian, but in general, most people don't. So, how common is nutrient deficiency in the United States today?
Yeah, I think let me answer this question I think in two ways because there's nutrient deficiency, which is such low habitual intake of an essential nutrient that it causes a disease of malnutrition. So think so low vitamin C that it causes scurvy. But then there's also nutrient insufficiency, which is I'm barely getting enough to not cause that disease of malnutrition. So I'm just barely avoiding scurvy. I've got enough vitamin C, but it's that entire space between that just barely enough and actually how much our bodies need. It's that whole world of gray in between. And they're problematic for different reasons. So deficiency, we don't see diseases like scurvy or pellagra or beriberi or rickets all that often. But blood tests have shown that about a third of Americans are at risk for at least one vitamin deficiency or iron deficiency anemia, which means their levels are low enough that any little thing could tip them over into that disease of malnutrition. And obviously, that's a more prevalent among people living with food insecurity. But that is, I mean, potentially a much bigger number than a lot of people were expecting to say, like, yeah, it's about a third of us. But nearly everyone is nutrient insufficient. So almost every single person, I mean, there's 4 essential nutrients for which 90% of Americans don't get enough of from their diets. Not so low that we have that disease of malnutrition, but we're in that like weird gray in between, low enough to be like the wheels fall off the cart, we were super sick. But in that gray between a disease of malnutrition and how much we actually need, what happens in that world of insufficiency is the biological systems that need that nutrient to do their jobs, it puts strain on the system to not have the resources that it needs, right? Like it's like running a car on empty all the time, right? That puts wear and tear on the engine. Eventually, you're going to have to take your car to a mechanic because something went wrong that's not related to how much gas is in the car. So it puts strain on those systems that then interact with our lifestyle, how active we are, how much sleep we're getting, how stressed we're under, our genetics, our environmental exposures, our social environment, our health related behaviors, like whether or not we smoke or drink. And all of those things collectively increase risk for chronic health problems like cardiovascular disease or type 2 diabetes, chronic kidney disease, Alzheimer's disease. And so this nutrient insufficiency, which impacts nearly everyone, is like adding a little fuel to that fire, contributing, all the different contributing factors working together to increase risk. And the reason why that's important is because it's a very clear point of intervention. Improving diet doesn't guarantee we won't develop those things because there are other risk factors and things like genetics that we have no control over. But diet plus lifestyle accounts for 40 to 50% of health outcomes. So it's not nothing either, right? It's something that we have some control over. It's not a guarantee. Sadly, few things in life are. But it is a really clear point of intervention where if we can make some hopefully small changes to our diets to make sure we actually are meeting our nutritional needs from the foods we eat, we've really dramatically reduced our risk of future health problems. And there's a lot of chronic conditions we may be facing where the condition can be improved or symptoms can be improved by upping nutrient intake now. That not necessarily a cure, although there are some situations where certainly that can be.
For sure. And now you had mentioned there's a few nutrients that a lot of us, I think, I don't know if you said a third, but a lot of us are not at the stage of being malnourished. We're not completely deficient, but are insufficient. So what nutrients are those? That's really
So
interesting.
the most common nutrient insufficiency is vitamin D.
Mm.
I like to kind of like put that in a box by itself. Vitamin D is sort of interesting because we make it ourselves in response to UV radiation from the sun. Our bodies turn cholesterol into vitamin D right in our skin cells, which is very, very cool. It's like an inactive form of vitamin D. It has to go to our liver to get converted, and then it has to go to our kidneys to get activated. So we kind of need like all of the systems of our body working together to get our vitamin D levels up from sun exposure. And then we also get vitamin D from food. So most notably, mushrooms contain a form of vitamin D, and seafood is sort of like our best source of vitamin D. So to say that we're like not getting enough vitamin D from our food, it's a really complex equation. Actually, about 75% of Americans have low levels of vitamin D in their bodies. So vitamin D, we'll just kind of put to the side. The next most common nutrient insufficiency, so that amorphous gray world between like so low that the wheels fall off the cart, but not actually getting enough, is potassium. Nearly 98% of Americans don't get enough potassium from our diets.
Wow.
And not getting enough potassium very strongly increases risk of cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease. Our kidneys use potassium to regulate blood pressure, and osteoporosis. So not getting enough potassium has these really strong links to long-term health problems. The next one I think is vitamin E, which is like 96% of people who don't get enough from their diets. And then vitamin B9, folate, which is at 90-ish percent. So those are like the top four that most people are not getting enough of.
Wow. Yeah, that's actually really significant. And folate, in particular, I guess if you're a pregnant woman or looking to get
Yeah.
pregnant, definitely kind of, especially even the period before, like before you're actually pregnant, it's super
Yep.
important to get enough of that. And I know a lot of people know that, but I didn't realize how many were actually insufficient in that. And so the nutrient density of our food, that's, nutrient dense is a term we hear a lot, but a lot of people don't know what that means. So
Yes.
we
I
define
would
it for
say,
people who don't and why it's so important.
yeah, I would say there's a really good reason why most of us don't know what nutrient density means. And it's because science hasn't given us a really clear definition beyond nutrients per calorie. So in the 1970s is when the term nutrient density was first coined. And back then they were like a food that delivers a substantial amount of nutrients per serving, the most wishy-washy definition you can imagine.
Mhm.
And that was then like translated to labeling laws. That's where a
Mhm.
good source and an excellent source as like labeled terms comes from. A good source has 10% of the daily value per serving, and an excellent source has 20% of the daily value of like a single nutrient per serving. And that actually led to a lot of sort of foods that we now recognize as being really nutritionally important, like nuts and seeds, like avocados, right? These like good healthy fats. It led to them sort of being demonized in the 70s and 80s. It led to greenwashing of labels, sort of that like the claims on the front of a food label, like fruit punch, can call itself a good source of vitamin C if it has 10% of the daily value. It's led to a lot of like misleading claims on labels. So in the early 2000s, like the World Health Organization was like, yo, this doesn't work. Like people are still not getting enough nutrients. We need a better definition. And so the community at large got together and redefined nutrient density as meaning a substantial amount of nutrients per calorie of food. So it's related to the energy density of food, which is a better measurement because what we need is ways of getting more nutrients within our energy requirements, not just more servings of foods. But the measurement of nutrient density, like how do you, okay, like that's the definition, but how do you know? How do you know what a nutrient dense food is?
Mhm.
That is something that has really eluded scientists. There's a few dozen different nutrient profiling methods. So these are calculations that try to quantify nutrients per calorie in a food. And I think this entire field as a whole has there's too many hands in the pot that are causing some algorithmic problems. So for example, there's a lot of studies where they kind of go, okay, how much, which nutrients should we put into our calculation so that the number that gets spit out on the other end best align with the healthy eating index, which is a measurement of how well somebody follows the USDA dietary guidelines. So we're going to figure out how many nutrients to put in this calculation. Is it 7? Is it 9? Is it 15? Oh, look, it's 9. It's 9. 9 nutrients in this calculation out of 50 essential nutrients.
Mhm.
Nine nutrients in this calculation best aligns with the healthy eating index. So that's probably what we should use. I look at that and go, maybe there's something that we could improve on the USDA dietary guidelines. I think there's a lot of dietitians out there who would agree that there's a few areas of improvement there. There's, nutrition analyses of USDA dietary guidelines also reveal common nutrient shortfalls and insufficiencies. So we've got some room for improvement here. Maybe we design a nutrient profiling method to best understand the nutritive value of a food and then use that to inform dietary guidelines, right? Use that as a tool rather than trying to retrofit our tool to fit something that changes every 5 years anyways. So, so in quantifying nutrient density, my first intention in building Nutrivore and the website and writing the book was to go through the science of nutrient profiling and figure out what was the best nutrient density score and use it, because having a number to show how valuable a food is in terms of how much nutrients it has per calorie is a very useful tool. Not the only one we want to look at when we're choosing food, but it's a great tool to have. And I spent 3 months reading just about every paper in the entire field, and I kept hitting why are we penalizing a food for containing sodium or cholesterol or saturated fats or sugars when it's not the food's problem? It's like the whole diet's problem. Like those things are just fine if we're getting them in that moderate amount. It's when they're overabundant. So why are we like devaluating all of the vitamins and minerals that this food has just because it also happens to have some sugar? I kept running into just what felt to me like really obvious poor decision makings in the algorithm for the calculation. So after 3 months, I threw in the towel and decided I need to develop my own nutrient profiling method. I can really see, right? Like we want to have the most nutrients we possibly can have. We don't want to normalize. We don't want to have like food groups weighted more than others. Like all of these different problems that I'm seeing in the scientific field as a whole. There's a lot of really like plant-based diet. Like a plant-based diet is beneficial, right? Eating lots of vegetables, fruit, legumes, nuts, and seeds, it's very beneficial. But a lot of nutrient profiling methods like build it in to devalue animal foods, right? So and devalue other really beneficial foods like seafood. So I ended up, basing, it's still algorithmically based on, it's actually the Nutrient Rich Food Index. It's still using the same type of mathematical formulas, but the Nutrivore score, which is great because it rhymes, but the Nutrivore score is the nutrient profiling method that I came up with to actually do a calculate based on the nutrients in that food, what is the total nutrition per calorie. And it uses 33 nutrients in its calculation rather than 9. And it's a very, very straightforward measurement of nutrient density and a fascinating lens through which to view food. And I want to emphasize, again, not the only thing we want to be looking at when we're understanding how to improve the quality of our diets, but such a great, like the amount that I've learned just from that number, the amount of foods that we as a society undervalue, but that are actually really nutrient dense, like that to me has been the most fun thing of this calculation.
That's really amazing. And so Nutrivore, so it's a database, correct? And like you've been describing. And so what led you to develop this database?
So I come into the wellness community through restrictive diets,
Yes.
and my world first started opening up. I think it was 2015 ish. I'm not the best at keeping track of years, but somewhere, give or take, a year in there. I started working on a book on the gut microbiome. It had not published yet. Hopefully, it'll someday see the light of day. But I started researching the gut microbiome, and that research really opened up my eyes to the value of foods that I was currently not eating. So I had a collection of foods that I was avoiding, and I kept coming up to, wow, this food is so good for our gut bacteria. Like it feeds feeds probiotic species, right? The types of bacteria that we really want in there. It increases microbial diversity, so we have more different strains. And that was the first, like, earliest beginnings of me really challenging my beliefs around food, the fear that I have developed of a lot of foods, the moralization of foods that I was engaging
Mm.
in. And I wish I could say there was like one eureka moment, but it wasn't. It was like years and years and years of very slowly and very iteratively expanding my horizon, um, kind of like relearning how to summarize science and how to go through science, really starting to, like, I very rarely look at individual studies now, and I almost always look at systematic reviews and meta-analyses, because you can't cherry pick those. They already they pool together data from many different studies to look at like what's the actual real effect here, where is most of the science pointing to, they include a step where they evaluate studies for bias, for the quality of their methodology. They'll throw out studies that are poor quality or that have massive conflicts of interest. So they kind of do that for you. And that's why they are like the top highest, like most rigorous scientific evidence we have. And so so my motivation for creating Nutrivore sort of came from this world of restrictive dieting where I was starting to, because of my research on the gut microbiome, because I was beginning to really like dig into the wonderful world of nutrient density, I was actively challenging my fear around food, very, making the choice to add foods that I had been avoiding back into my diet and really, go on this personal journey of increasing the diversity of the foods that I'm eating, and put these foods back into my diet and really, figure out how my body responds to these foods. The same time that I was on that journey towards expanding my diet, the wellness community as a whole went the other way, and went towards more and more restrictive eating patterns. And so I, as a voice in this community, the conversations I kept having of people who, okay, well, I'm doing these 4 diets, right? All overlapping. So I'm only eating 12 foods, but I'm so sick. Here's all of my problems. And I really, I would look at that and go, there's no way that diet is actually supplying all the nutrients that person needs. And the whole community was going, more fear, more fear, more fear. And I was going, I need to let go of my fear. I need to ditch my fear. I need to move beyond my fear. And that led to the creation of Nutrivore as a dietary philosophy, not a diet itself. It is simply the goal of getting all of the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat. And it looks at how the whole food affects our health rather than, oh, look, I can identify this one compound in this food that does this thing to cells in a petri dish, therefore the whole food must be terrible. That's where like the food toxin fear mongering online, that is like the summary description of the logic that goes into it. But foods aren't just one compound, right? There's hundreds, thousands of different compounds in a food, including a lot of different nutrients that interact with, right, and change how the biochemistry is, that change the pathways that are activated, and that can, when a food has a lot of nutrients, that can be super beneficial for all of our cells that need those nutrients. So really looking at how the whole food impacts health as opposed to individual food compounds. And so Nutrivore came out of really seeing the pendulum swing as far towards restriction as it possibly can go in the wellness community, and knowing that it's coming back and going, something needs to catch the pendulum and stop it from swinging altogether. And that to me is what Nutrivore is, right? It is, there's no yes foods and no foods. There's no food you have to cut out. There's no food you have to eat. It's really just about like a broad nutritional sciences education, right? The knowledge base that we all need, that is accessible for everyone, that can help to inform our day-to-day choices, get us out of that like restrictive mindset that feeds cravings, and then we cheat, and then we fall off the wagon, and then we're yo-yoing and we're on this huge roller coaster. It gets us off of that. And then it also provides the knowledge base to help us be, more immune to the messaging from diet culture that tells us it's terrible because you don't look a certain way, right? Like you're doing it wrong. You're the one who's failing, right? That's what makes us feel like we need to go buy the next thing, right? Do the next thing. It gets us it makes us less susceptible to predatory marketing. So Nutrivore is, it's super logical, right? We need to get all those nutrients, right? There's daily values for all the nutrients for a reason. We should be choosing foods to get it. But diet culture has taught us so many different conflicting things. Most of us don't know how to do that intuitively. So Nutrivore is about that education to help us like relearn what a nutritious diet looks like and do it in a way that doesn't leave us feeling deprived, that that is adaptable to our medical needs, to our dietary preferences, to our access to food, to our budgets, to the flavors that we like, so we can, really apply this education to each one of us individually. And my hope is we're going to catch that, diet culture pendulum and just put it down. And then we can just all live in a world post diet culture. I mean, that's just a
That
small
would be
goal,
great.
but that is the end goal.
That would be great. I really like that story, because I too went through the same thing, from restriction, overly restrictive, to focusing on more of the nutrient density of the food. And you brought up a really good point that the wellness industry really has gone more and more and more towards restriction.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people are wanting to say, hey, let's open it back up a bit.
Yeah.
Let's open it back up. So that's really important. It's a really important message, because it doesn't really serve people, and it also doesn't really take into account people's preferences, people's lifestyle,
Yeah.
And things like that. So what are some foods that we eat a lot now, that we commonly eat, that are more nutrient dense than we think? I'm sure there's probably plenty.
Oh, there's so many. I'm going to share, okay, my favorite one that people think, I mean, it literally has nicknames, is iceberg lettuce. So
Oh,
people
okay.
call iceberg lettuce the nutritional equivalent of cardboard. They call it crunchy water, right? And there's this
Yes.
whole group of people that's the only lettuce they like. And they feel like, why even bother eating lettuce? Because I might as well be eating cardboard. It's just crunchy water, right? Like, why
Right.
even go out of my way to eat this lettuce? But it is actually more nutrient dense than celery or artichoke or cucumber, right? If you think about those vegetables, I mean, they're all nutrient dense. They're all good choices. We're not dissing cucumber here. But iceberg lettuce can hold its own in that room. It is very nutrient dense. It's a particularly good source of, folate, fiber, polyphenols, and biotin. And it is absolutely nutritionally valuable. Are other lettuces more nutrient dense? Sure. But if iceberg is the one you like, or that you can afford, that you have access to, it's the one that is served on, the side of your, fast food meal. Like, it is very nutritionally valuable. And it's amazing how much hate there is on the internet for iceberg lettuce.
It's true.
And it's absolutely, it is, the Nutrivore score redeems iceberg lettuce completely. Another food that I would put in this list is watermelon. So I
Okay.
think watermelon has kind of the reputation of being sugar water, right? Or it's just all
Mm-hmm.
water.
Mm-hmm.
That it's, it's all, you have to be careful. It's so easy to eat. I mean, yes, I agree. It is very easy to eat half a watermelon. It's one of my
It
favorite
is.
foods. And there's this kind of idea that you have to feel guilty for eating a lot of watermelon.
Mm-hmm.
Watermelon is almost as nutrient dense as cantaloupe, which is the most nutrient dense type of melon you can get at like a normal grocery store. It is the second best source on the average person's diet of lycopene after tomatoes, which is an
Oh,
incredibly beneficial carotenoid, very strongly reduces risk of cardiovascular disease. And watermelon is the best food source of a really cool amino acid called L-citrulline, which improves metabolic health. It's in like a lot of supplements for weightlifters, but you could just get it from watermelon. So watermelon is like the
oh,
next one that I'd be like, I don't think people value how nutrient dense watermelon is. They feel guilty when they eat a giant piece because they think they weren't supposed to eat that much. Like, it's a very nutritious food. And a third one, to just, we can't stop at two. I think we got to wrap it up with three. Potatoes. I feel like
mm-hmm.
potatoes get maligned by every diet.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone says it's empty carbs. Like it's terrible for you. Potatoes are sort of third quartile. I mean, they're like better than middle of the road for starchy foods. There's lots of starchy foods that are higher, but potatoes are they're higher than average by like a good amount, and they're surprisingly like vitamin and mineral rich. One of the best contributors of potassium, which we already talked about, 98% of people don't get enough.
Mm-hmm.
Great source of potassium, great source of resistant starch, which is a very special type of fiber that's really good for gut bacteria, going back to my gut microbiome nerding out roots. And yes, if we're only eating them fried and like doused in salt, we're kind of negating a lot of the benefits from the nutrients of the actual potato. But as long as we're mixing up the ways that we're eating that potato, like also eating them mashed or boiled or roasted or baked, then we're really like embracing those nutrients. And there's lots of studies showing, actually, there's studies showing that as long as they're not French fries, that eating
Mhm.
potatoes lowers blood pressure because of all the
Oh, I
potassium
love
it
that.
has. So, I think we can all not feel guilty about potatoes too. I would like us to not feel guilty about any food. That's really like the number one goal of Nutrivores. Don't feel guilty about anything. But I would say those are like the foods that have, for me, like through all of the work building the Nutrivore score database, writing the book, building all the articles on the Nutrivore.com website, those foods have like those wonderful redemption arcs. Like they were so maligned as these horrible villains, they were scapegoated, and now we can go, no, look at the nutrients they contain, look at the science. Like these are great health promoting foods.
That's great. Thank you for that, especially the potatoes. I love potatoes, and yes, I remember in particular a few diets. It was it paleo or whole. I mean, Whole30 is an elimination, but still,
Mm-hmm.
potatoes were, I think, kind of maligned. Sweet potatoes are okay, or like yams and stuff,
Yes,
but potatoes not. And I really
they're
appreciate you
not
saying this because they're
that
they're so good.
different. Yeah,
No,
I
they're
mean, sweet
not.
potatoes. Sweet potatoes are a little bit more nutrient dense than like regular potatoes, but they're not that much more nutrient
No,
dense. Um,
no.
and I'm a person who I really like more neutral starches rather than sweet starches. So I would
Hmm.
rather eat, potato or like a green plantain or cassava root. I would
Yeah.
rather eat a vegetable like that over a sweet potato or winter squash like any day of the week. And the great thing about Nutrivore is that I have that permission.
That's so cool. And so with Nutrivore, can you make, I guess if you want to make a nutrient dense meal or a balanced
Mhm.
meal, can you use that database to do it?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend combining the database with other resources that I've created.
Okay.
So when it
Okay.
comes to like a nutrient dense meal, one of the resources I've created is called the Nutrivore Meal Map. You can get it in my new book, Nutrivore. You can also get it as a free download when you sign up for my weekly email newsletter. So there's lots of ways for you to get it. And I will just tell everyone what it is. So also you could just listen and don't need the downloadable one that you can print out and put on your fridge. So it has echoes of my plate, and I intentionally so. But so the neutral meal map, you divide your plate into four roughly equal quarters. We are not measuring anything with a ruler right now. One quarter is a starchy food. So that could be a
Okay.
root vegetable, a legume, a grain, preferably whole grains, but something kind of starchy. One quarter is a protein food. So that could be meat or seafood or eggs or a plant protein or dairy product or broth. And if you pick a whole food plant protein like lentils, you kind of merge the starchy quarter with the protein quarter, right? So now that one food is playing both roles. And the other half of your plate is fruits and vegetables. Ideally, at least a couple of different ones, which is why we're still thinking about it in terms of quarters. But it's a range of fruits and vegetables. Um, More vegetables than fruit, ideally, but also whatever is accessible in terms of like actually getting it, but also flavor profile, what works with your meal. That's the remaining half of your plate. And when you compose your plate that way, this is like the simplest way to think about Nutrivore. This is like first steps Nutrivore, and that most of those foods are whole foods. You can cook them in whatever fats. Olive oil, vegetable oils are going to be healthier options there, or use salad dressing or that nuts or seeds as condiments. Right, throw those into your salad. So fats still get a role in this plate. But when you just kind of think of that as your basic meal composition, almost always, I'm sure you could finagle this in a way that's not balanced macronutrients, but almost always, you're going to end up in the accepted macronutrient distribution ranges for protein, carbohydrate, and fat, which is the healthiest place to be in terms of macronutrients.
Yes.
You're almost always going to get enough fiber. You're almost always going to get enough protein, and you're almost always going to meet the daily values of most of your vitamins and minerals. So just doing that is going to get you, let's say, 90% of the way to that Nutrivore goal of just having most of your meals look like that. It doesn't even need to be all of them, right? Like, do you still want a really, simple, a takeout, or like a really simple breakfast that doesn't flush to follow this plate? That can absolutely fit into the arc of your week. But most of your meals looking that way, just doing that is enough for most people to meet their nutritional needs.
Oh, that's so cool. That's really cool. Now, you mentioned your book, Nutrivore. I wanted to talk
Mm-hmm.
about that. That's coming out really soon. And actually, by the time this is released, it may already be out. So when is the release date? And tell our listeners about the book.
So it comes out May 14th. So hopefully,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
hopefully listeners are
That's
listening to this after May 14th, and they can just run out and grab it. It is called Nutrivore, the Radical New Science for Getting the Nutrients You Need from the Food You Eat, by me, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. And it is, it's all of it. So it is the Nutrivore philosophy, why restrictive dieting or restrictive approaches to diets don't serve us. So why no food is off the table, pardon the pun, on Nutrivore. It is a introduction to understanding how nutrients interact with our health. There's 27 nutrients that I actually do like a little bit of a deeper dive, explaining exactly how that nutrient links to a specific health problem. And then there's a lot of practical resources for upping nutrient intake within this like permissive structure. And interwoven within is what you need to know to adapt Nutrivore to your current diet or anti-diet. And also a lot of, I've interwoven historical anecdotes, really interesting stories from specific studies, in order to help understand where those like the things that we think are true, right? The things that we've been told about diet again and again and again that we hold true that are really not, that really aren't what the science says. I talk about a lot of the origins of really pervasive diet myths in order to understand, like, first of all, how far back those go. They almost all go back to a time before the nutritional sciences could show whether or not that was true. And it helps, I think, to sort of create like a clean slate in our minds for new information. If we can understand that the things that we thought were true, like the reason why we think they're true is because of the super charismatic character 200 years ago who first thought this with no evidence and told everyone they knew. And it gives us it gives us forgiveness for buying into those things, because we all did. Like, we all thought those were true. Those myths have been around for 200-300 years. So I've interwoven those stories in order to really help address, I think, some of the information that can challenge current beliefs and hopefully make it a little bit easier to be open to that new information. So all of that is told within a compelling narrative. I worked really, really hard on this book to make sure that it's a fun read, and that it like I wanted to make a nutrition book page turner. So that was my goal, and I hope everyone will go out and get it, and then come let me know if I succeeded.
That's really cool. And so it will be available on Amazon, I'm assuming, and wherever you can get books.
Yeah, wherever you can get books. So
Oh, that's really cool.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, Books a Million, hopefully local independent bookstores. So wherever you like to buy your books, obviously I'm a big fan of independent bookstores. But wherever you like to buy your books, you should be able to get my book there across the world.
That's really cool. I'm looking forward to it, and it sounds really cool. I like how you said it's a nutrition page turner. That make it fun for people. That's really cool. So exciting. Now, how can people find out more about you? I know on social media I follow you, and I love your science strolls. Yeah, you talk
Oh,
a
thank
little
you.
bit about nutrition there. Those are really cool. I love them. So,
Yeah.
can you give out, please, your social media and how people can sign up for your newsletter?
So I'm at Dr. Sarah Ballantyne on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, and TikTok. As I pause to make sure I got them all. Those are all the places that I'm active,
Cool.
and each platform I do slightly different content for. So there's value if you have multiple places you like to hang out online. I will give you something different at each place. So come follow me
Cool.
all of the places. And my website is Nutrivore.com. So think a carnivore eats meat and a herbivore eats plants and a nutrivore eats nutrients. And from there, you can find everything. So you can look at the top menu, click the join button that will link. If I join a new social media platform, that's where you can find that. That's where you can find information for my Patreon. And that's where you can find a lot of information on nutrients. There's so many detailed articles about all of the different things that nutrients do in our bodies, like over 60 of them. That's where you can learn about different foods. That's where you can learn about the Nutrivore philosophy. And of course, you can learn about my book at nutrivore.com/book.
So cool. So Nutrivore.com sounds like that's the main hub for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I get your newsletter. It's really cool. People should sign up, and really looking forward to the book.
Yeah, thank you. Me too.
So before we sign off, is there anything that you would like to share with the listeners that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like this was a wide ranging conversation.
It is.
I think if there's one thing to say about Nutrivore, I'd like to really emphasize that Nutrivore is a permissive dietary structure rather than a restrictive one. So we're really looking to give ourselves permission to eat a wide range of foods. Dietary diversity is a very important feature of a healthy diet. So just eating a wide range of foods is a marker of a high quality diet. So Nutrivore is about expanding our diets within our own, obviously, like respecting medical needs, for example.
Yes.
Um, but it's also, I've talked a lot about, I talk a lot in the book about specific foods that are really valuable nutritionally. It's worth emphasizing, and I do in the book, that there's also no food you have to eat. So Nutrivore is
Mhm.
as much about identifying. So let's say, for example, like seafood is so beneficial, it reduces risk of cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease. It is our main food source of long chain omega-3 fats, which are really important for neurological health, cardiovascular health, and immune health. But if you're allergic to seafood, or you follow a
Mhm.
vegetarian or vegan diet, the Nutrivore like educational ecosystem helps you identify other ways to get those nutrients. So it also helps you identify like when supplements may be needed. So if you don't eat seafood, maybe that means you're going to eat more sea vegetables, or maybe you're going to supplement with algal oil in order to make sure that you're getting those omega-3s that you need. So Nutrivore is something that you fit into your life, not the other way around. And I think that's just another way that we can transcend diet culture.
Well, I love that, and thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful, and I love that it's definitely more permissive, not restrictive, and that's just going to help a lot of people. I think a lot of people sometimes get turned off to nutrition because of they feel judged,
Yeah.
um, they feel it's so restrictive, and they get turned off to it. And I think it's changing slowly, and I think it's really cool. So you're part of driving that change. I appreciate that
Thank
a lot.
you. Thank you so
Well,
much.
well, you're welcome. And thank you, Dr. Sarah, for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot from it myself, which is really cool. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. And thanks again for having me.
You're welcome. All right. Bye bye.